So let's start. So I hope that after this webinar, you are aware that the world outside is dangerous, but with right kind of work, habits and acts, we can be safe. So my philosophy is that people make the cybersecurity and we can make it better. Okay, Martti.
So you may see and hear me. Okay, so I'm coming from University of Jyväskylä and I will talk to you this evening why cybersecurity is important, and especially from like the company's management or leadership perspective, and what are the responsibilities they have. My content is so that I speak about a little bit cyber world and more the threats and vulnerabilities and risks. So I'm sorry my presentation is not so positive, and I hope the other speakers create more positive environment after my presentation. This is very typical to me, be more paranoid about the cyber world and all the threats there. So this picture is positive. So this world is 20 years ago, 20 years old, 25 years old. So we have around 20 billion network connected devices globally, IoTs, Internet of Things. And there are some estimate how much we have these IoT devices in the future, 2025, maybe 75 billion. Cell phone users worldwide are over 5 billion, about 67% of whole global population. And in the internet are almost 60% of whole population globally. And 1998, only 3.6% of the world population use internet. I start with 1991. And so if we're looking into services globally, over 200 billion email will be sent. Tweets, 500 million. Google search, 3.5 billion. So this huge amount activities. And 2 years ago, loaded globally 258 billion applications. 258 billion applications. And social media users are a little bit over half of the whole population in the earth. So we have quite young, but a huge environment. And if we're looking like this environment, we have different cyberspace or cyber world actors. Citizens like me and you, then we have the business and the public sector. And the elements, we use this PPT like people, processes, and technology. So those are the vulnerabilities, and those are also the areas of cybersecurity actions. And then we speak about like national level cyber resilience, meaning that how we protect our national critical infrastructure, because more and more different services, public services are in internet, like Vero and Kela and so on. Malware production. You may find this AW-Test is German company and publish real time how many malware production per year. They started 1984 and now is the last about 10 years. So I took this picture November 23. And this year production is over 1 billion, meaning 350,000 new malware a day, and over 3 million old malware new variants. So daily we are focusing millions of new malwares. And we try to protect our systems and devices, all the attacks against those malwares. So somewhere in the world is very active people doing that. Everybody knows this Vastaamo case, but if we look in how many people information are compromised, this is not the biggest one. Of course, it's very dangerous from like human perspective, but the many bad guys try to catch big fish. Here is the list about mega data breach. Like Yahoo is leading about 500 million user data, maybe 3 billion. So everybody who has account in Yahoo. And then we have the Marriott Hotel and Friend Finder page and so on. So this picture shows how the bad guys try to catch the huge amount of customer data. Credit card numbers, addresses, phone numbers, even the last one, the US Office of Personnel Management, meaning that somebody stolen all the names, addresses, fingerprints, social security numbers from all US personnel who are working in different states and those organizations, even they who are retired. This is one example. There are so many of them. 143 million American consumer sensitive personal information was exposed data breach in Equifax, one of the biggest credit reporting agencies. And the hackers accessed people's names, social security numbers, birthdays, addresses, driver's license numbers. And then they can sell them or use them in online market. Who is the target? Everybody, everything. We have the military targets, we have the political targets, and the society, critical infrastructure, information infrastructure, SCADA systems, which are in this manufacturing area, business and industry, and we, the citizens. Everybody who are part of this cyberspace are target. What is the motive of the attacker? They are different because if we see some kind of attack, we don't know who is behind and what is the motive. So we have the cyber criminal, cyber warrior, or cyber terrorist. The criminals, they have focused our money or the financial gain. And okay, the cyber warrior fights for his or her military objectives, and this cyber terrorist, they have their own agenda. The attack itself don't say who is behind and what is the motive. I'm using this kind of like method or list about different type of motives. And then I speak about the cyber vandalism, crime, intelligence, terrorism, sabotage, or warfare. There are different analyses. What is the biggest area of the attacks? And I find some research saying that the cybercrime are 80% of all attacks in the cyberspace, and 10% are the cyber intelligence. intelligence, like spying, espionage. So the most of the attack, they have these financial focus. And this business is very huge. We don't know how much money the bad guys collect, but the total cybercrime revenue is 1.5 trillion bucks. They are these illegal online markets, trade secret, IP theft, data trading, crimeware and crime as a service, and ransomwares. It means that it depends nations, but it is something 0.5 to 1.5% of gross domestic product, GDP. So this cybercrime business is bigger than drugs. It's the most beneficial business, illegal business in the world today. So we have those threats from vandalism to cyber warfare, and then we have these vulnerabilities. People, processes, and technology have the vulnerabilities. And the research says that 2/3 based on the people. So we are not doing very well when we are surfing in the internet or using emails or whatever we are doing in the cyber world. And the processes and technology vulnerabilities are only 1/3. And this picture shows that we cannot influence threats. We cannot say that, please don't make any attacks. We have those bad guys, and that is like the fact, normal today. And vulnerabilities we can reduce. So we have possibility to reduce those vulnerabilities. And then we have this risk part, and we can manage them. So I want to be a little bit positive also that in this presentation. There are different vulnerabilities in this area, people, processes, and technology. We have like software vulnerabilities, hardware, data reliability. In the processes, we have lack of cybersecurity investments, security policy, or situational awareness. And then we don't maybe understand enough about the cybersecurity in our personal life or as a member in Centria or university or home. And then we have lack of know-how and skills. Some examples like software, I cannot like this Carnegie Mellon University estimate that commercial software, they have 20-30 bucks for every 1,000 line of code. I cannot code in, so I don't know why it's so hard to make perfect code. Meaning that Google, there is 2 billion lines of code, meaning that there is 40 million code bugs. Not everything are bad, but those code bugs, the bad guys try to find, and those bugs they use when they make these attacks. Hardware also. There are different types to compromise the microchips. Fake and bake, meaning that baking 24 hours, the lifespan is shortened from 15 years to 6 months. We may add extra transistor. We have find chips which have 1,000 extra, or nick the wire or reconnected the wiring. So make totally different microchips. There is, like you may see that is Toshiba something U52, and this another one, and it looks like the same. But if we use X-ray, they are different inside. Outside, all the numbers are the same, but somebody has created totally different microchip. Lack of cyber situational awareness. There's research 4 years old saying that about 20% of the companies, they have capability detect cyber attack quickly or very quickly. And only 21% companies have one common view of data resources they have. So the problem is that the processes in the companies are not good level. They don't even see very fast if somebody is attacking. And they don't have any view about IT resources they have. And no hand skills. So I have made these quick questions. What should every CIO know about the cybersecurity? Board member, IT professionals, and every cybersecurity professionals and every worker. And question is how the company manage cybersecurity know-how, that everybody knows enough cybersecurity, what is necessary in his or her job. When I'm showing this picture, that is, I lose my trust to humans. It's like research asking is you are willing to give your password and username to third party. 20% say yes. And if somebody offer $1,000, 44% say yes. So that's why we human are sometimes or quite often the weakest link in this whole. The question is that when we have this threat and vulnerabilities, and we have different type of risk, the business reputation of the company, legal or recovery costs. And those are the reason why we need the cybersecurity. Because the question of like the money, our business, our good name of the company, and the countermeasures are the security management, culture, and technology. All those areas we can improve our possibility against the cyber attacks. Okay, now if you have something to ask, I'm willing to answer if I know.
There is one question from Jacob in chat, and he is interested in the issue of securing intra-corporate ICT networks, especially in the context of potential security or vulnerability from email. So basically, how could we prepare, for example, against malicious software that was received through email and stored to company shared files? Is it that even possible? And there was also a continuation question, or is it even possible to find out which computer the problem originated from? And my continuation to that, do we even care where it started from as long as we get rid of it?
So about the email, like of course the company like university here choose what kind of email system we use, and I hope that they are good enough against all spamming or different type of attacks. In the email, I have said that when I'm using the emails, normally I don't open the email if I don't know the sender. Meaning that sometimes it's very difficult to connect me, but the most important is that if you get the email and you don't know who is the sender, don't open the attached parts or don't click the links in those. Because the phishing, the social engineering methods, phishing is the most using methods of the criminals. They send different type of emails, trying that you click the links or opening the PDF or whatever they are, and then you maybe give your passwords and usernames and those. So that's hygiene using the emails is very important, because it is the main attack against the humans the bad guys use.
Helinä, do you want to comment?
Yes, thank you. I want to comment on the humans are the weakest link, because I hear that quite a lot, and a lot of security companies use that in their advertising and in research, and we say, oh, humans this, humans that. But like Martti here said, humans are the target of most of these attacks. And it's mainly because of the whole technological ecosystem that we are put into, and we can't do anything about it to stop it. So this is why more attention needs to be paid to security-based design as we create services, as we provide them, as we have new messaging services and everything. Because if they are vulnerable and humans can't do anything about it, of course humans will be the weakest links, because we are prone to those mistakes that are made in a design process. But this may be changing over time, hopefully. You know, cars weren't safe immediately when they came out, so we'll maybe looking into 10, 20 years where we can have a safer ecosystem to work in. But in the meantime, we have to work every day to make sure that humans are secure from these security issues that they face.
Yes, I fully agree that. So when I use that human are the weakest link, I don't say that the humans are like doing bad or they are almost every case as a victim. And the question is that, as I said, that maybe they don't know how to do. The companies, I have experienced that some of the companies don't put enough effort to give right information to all the members and the personnel, how to do right way. So the question is, does know-how and skill and training and education.
I'm sure we could all discuss this a lot, but I think we should continue this more in the panel discussion to keep our timetable going.
Okay.
Yes, Laura.
Yes, thank you. Let me just quickly share my screen. All right. Can you, oops, not there. Over here. All right. Can you see me and see my screen? All right, so thank you, Centria, for inviting me here today. And thank you, Martti, for the previous speech on threat modeling. Very intriguing. So I will have a topic like today, Laura, other Laura Palavuori, you asked me to talk about data and what is data? How can it be breached? What can criminals do with the breached data? And along these lines. So it will expand on the topic that Martti just discussed, but hopefully it will have some new insight as well. So first of all, I want to introduce myself. So my name is Laura Kankaala, and I'm a security professional, white hat hacker, and well, many other names as well. But currently, actually, I'm not working anywhere, but I'll go back to working at F-Secure starting from January. And before that, I worked at several startups doing security, being as a security lead and also a security researcher. So my background is more on the offensive security side. So how to look at things from the criminal's perspective, how to break things, how to hack things. So that's basically where I come from, and my take on these things also come from there quite heavily. But before I go into the topic itself, I want to basically introduce myself further. So I have been with computers for most of my life. So this bottommost picture on the left-hand side is a picture from '96 that showcases me and my little sister. My little sister is the one pulling on the chair, playing around with our first computer. So a tiny bit later than Martti's first experience with computers. But ever since, I have been very intrigued with computers and how to, not only how to break things, but how to build things as well. So from like that point on, I have also perhaps especially the Finnish-speaking audience may have seen me in DocStop's Team Whack documentary series, where we hacked into several different targets. So for example, into YouTubers' life, IoT devices, into a car, a company, gaming stream, and so on. And then outside of that as well, I work with a nonprofit charity organization called Outreach, where we help at-risk groups to reclaim their privacy in digital spaces. And then I also do a couple of podcasts. One active one right now is called Turvakäräjät. Unfortunately, that one is also encrypted in Finnish. And actually, before I talk about what is actually data breach and what can be done with breached data, I just want to point out that there is so much data and so like different types of data, and that is like the actual what the criminals are after, that is probably only the fraction of the data that is actually available. And a lot of the data that, for example, falls into the hands of opportunistic criminals, or even when I do any kind of security assessments, a lot of the times the data that I am able to access, even though it's not a good hygiene that I can access the data, it could not, like, it's not always something that is directly monetizable. So there are data that is just for example, logs or telemetry, or then just for analytics, for example, to see what people are doing, or just like logs, for example, to see how the system itself is operating. And then naturally all the digitalized records that we have, for example, these days, medical records and so on. But for a lot of these cases, the data itself can be hard to sell forward or hard to monetize. And well, you could potentially find a way to monetize it, but then you sometimes need to bend over backwards to find a way how to ransom the victims, for example. But with that being said, then because there's such a huge magnitude of data being collected and we are handing it out ourselves all the time, and as was also touched upon in the previous topic, there are multiple ways on how data can be breached. So first of all, there are, for example, misconfigurations so that administrative ports such as RDP, so this one here, the remote desktop protocol, so Windows, basically remote administrative ports are left open to the internet, and they are discovered through services such as Shodan, or then, as was discussed, the malicious emails, so sending attachments with macros in them that allow remote code to be executed on the computer, or then just simply a lack of processes, for example, that the data is not disposed correctly. And the data could be, for example, if we throw out letters that have our social security numbers or so on, they could also be then breached in that manner. So there's it's a whole another topic how all of these data breaches happen. But just to say that it's such a, there's so many ways for data to leak and to be accessible to the outsider. But I think the main crucial thing to look at here is to understand who is after you. So who are the actual threat actors that are then out to get you? And this is something also that Martti also discussed a little bit, but I'll just give my own take on it a little bit, because this is something that I also have to think about a lot when doing any kind of assessment. So there are, and this is also not the absolute truth, naturally, there could be people that fall in the middle, or that are part of multiple different threat actor groups. But when we talk about a cyber threat actor or threat actors, what we mean are the groups that are behind the attacks, and typically they are either their profiles fit together and they're put to one group because of that, or their motives are in a specific realm. So for example, I would say that for example, personal profiteers or thrill seekers, they would be the people who are doing, for example, causing denial of service attacks, or trying to mess with someone or gain personal profit, for example, make their life easier by buying something or selling something, or then they could be just finding or they just want to do something for their own interests. And then there's the more ideologically driven hacktivists that typically are private groups, not necessarily sponsored by nation states, but sometimes there could be links to nation states as well. But then they are working more towards like spreading a message and trying to attack in just activity online. And then there's the cyber criminals whose sole purpose is to make money. And these are typically, they can be very organized, and they can, if you think about your IT company, they can be very close to that. So they have the business processes to support ransoming. They have the business processes to help the victims that they are ransoming, to call them and ask them, for example, how to transfer my money into cryptocurrency. So it's very organized in that sense. And then there's the terrorist groups that want to sabotage, for example, or cause some kind of violent attacks. And then insider threats that are inside an organization that have potentially more access than an outsider would have. And then finally, the nation states that are just motivated by geopolitical reasons or political reasons and want to act through those manners. But these are basically the overall, like the landscape that we're operating in, or the criminals are operating in. And the data then, sorry, I need to move your faces a little bit. So the data basically is there, like, this is how I would put it, but maybe someone else has a different definition for it. But I would say that there's definitely different types of data. So there's the instant monetization, or the data that can be instantly monetized. So for example, credit card numbers, passwords, or sensitive personally identifiable information that can be directly sold and direct profit can be gotten out of it. For example, these could be sold for people who want to use the credit cards for doing credit card frauds, or passports for people who are trying to escape countries, or who want to basically move to another country. Or then in some cases, sensitive personally identifiable information can be used to order expensive items online and so on. And then there's the secondhand profit. So for example, credentials or remote access that can be useful, but you can use it potentially to get more money out of it. For example, accessing accounts then that have credit cards linked to them and so on. And then there's the future purposes, and these would be documents, for example, medical records or intellectual property that can be sold potentially instantly, or then it could have in the future a bigger meaning, and for example, in the future it could be used to ransom a person, an organization, or some other party. And when it comes to data breach, I think, well, this was also mentioned as well, but a very notable thing that happened here in Finland was the case that happened with Vastaamo. And Vastaamo is a psychotherapy center that got hacked by a party that then ransomed first Vastaamo and then ransomed the users or the clients of Vastaamo. So the people who had gone to the psychotherapy center, basically. And what this meant was that this was quite a unique case, I would say, even globally, because it's very common that companies are ransomed with the money that has been stolen from them. But to turn this against the individual users is more rare. And more common is to see things like this. So for example, ransomware was mentioned, but that there's ransomware that hits a company network or even a private individual. And what we're seeing these days is that they're not only necessarily encrypting data, but they can also be stealing data, so that if you're not paying the ransom for unlocking your files, then you will be paying the ransom, or the criminals hope that you will be paying the ransom for the data that they have stolen. And this also happens to private individuals. And then, as I already mentioned, the data that is sold, for example, passports and so on, that are sold in Tor network for profit. But with that being said, I just want to point out the data, and it's like data is not valuable only for the criminals or the ones that are perpetrating these kind of crimes. It's also valuable for the criminal minded. So at least I've been, as I mentioned, outreach. So there we have had we've done a lot of research for digital abuse. So in a lot of cases, we see how data that we have shared with a partner, with a friend, with someone we know, or even just in social media, how it can be turned against us by these individuals who want to harass us. And naturally, this is a criminal activity as well in most cases, but it's not something that we think about when we think about data breaches and how data can be abused. And then there can be the data can be used for controls. So for example, by nation states or by states, or within smaller circles, within communities, to perpetrate surveillance or censorship. And then naturally, if we think about data exploitation in general, for example, through machine learning algorithms, then there is the part of manipulation or even information warfare, or trying to affect our decision making. And I realized that I have been talking a lot about the threats and the negative things. So I just want to drop here as well that security is very holistic. So we need to look at security from multiple different angles. And as I said, that data can be breached from so many angles. So we need to tackle it as a really big problem. And that's why we need a lot of different types of people from different backgrounds, from different ideas to look at security, look at these big problems that we have in our society, and try to figure out how we can minimize the risk and the threats of being attacked. And thank you. I hope I didn't go over time, but if you want to, here's my social media handles. So please do feel free to follow me. And if you have any questions, then I am more than happy to answer those now if there's time.
Thank you, Laura. There's actually a couple of questions for you in the chat. I'll still read them out loud.
Yep.
So people who probably can't see it can also hear what we're talking. So, hi, Laura. I remember you had an interview with Team WAC where you mentioned that you do not belong to any social media. I am retraining now, and my interest is in cybersecurity. Every place says that you have to belong to a social media in order to get a job in the field. I myself do not belong to any social media service, so I wonder, how can I get the job in a new field after graduation? Previous work I have been doing my job well, but in this area I do not have any contacts. But the idea of abandoning the principles is not attractive. So is there any chance of getting employed in the industry without LinkedIn, etc.?
Definitely. And where did you read me not being on social media? Because I am quite active on social media also, because that's the means of for people to communicate with me. But with what you said with not being on social media, I don't think that that's a hindrance in getting a job or landing a job in cybersecurity or security, or in whatever manner you want to work in security. It's more about, because in Finland especially, I don't know how this is for other countries, but for the recruiters, they are not actually even by law allowed to look you up online. So it would be weird if they, in an interview, if they bring up the fact that you don't have any social media. But this applies at least to Finland. I don't know how this is if you are in Sweden, for example. So it's something, maybe if someone asks you that in a job interview, you could ask them, like, how do you know I'm not on any social media, unless you have given naturally explicit permission for them to look you up.
Thank you for your answer. And another question, what are some of the main reasons that businesses or organizations have insufficient information security policies or tools? Is it lack of understanding, lack of money, or something else?
That's a great question. I have not ever worked with a company or been in a company where they have told me that security is not important for us. And with that being said, it's still security, especially if you're a company who is not in the business of security, like for example, F-Secure or Detectify, where I used to work, then security is, well, for all companies, but it's more of about handling the risks. And because if you're, for example, a big organization and you have been operating for a long time, the amount of attack surface, which means that the places that you can be attacked, so that can be technological infrastructure that is outside, that can be visible outside. It can be the physical premises of your office building, or it can be the people working for you. That can be quite huge, and mitigating all of that. So there's no way to easily just put a firewall in front of everyone, so to say. So it's not a lack of, well, it can be a, I would say, instead of lack of understanding, I think it's about being lost in translation sometimes because the fact is that also in security, like for the threats that we have and for the vulnerabilities that are out there, it's constantly evolving and shifting. So having just a person for that to understand what is the actual things happening and what are the basically the attack surface that we are exposing, it can be an intimidating task, and but it needs definitely resources for that. And I think, at least personally, how I feel is that it comes down to resourcing most of the time.
I think we should move forward, and we can take more questions then on the panel discussion. So Martin from Luleå.
Now let's see if you guys can hear me and see my screen. I take that as a yes. Let's see, it seems like we're on the last slide. There we go. All right, so yeah, my name is Martin Lundgren. I'm a researcher at Luleå University of Technology, and my area has been risk management, and I did that for my PhD studies as well. I've been mostly on the social side of things, studying basically how routines for establishing a sound process for working with risks actually come to happen.
Sorry, Martin, a quick, you are also sharing the whole screen, so we can also see our own faces in the screen, so it might be disrupting your...
Absolutely, let me fix that. Hide video panel. There we go, better.
Yes, awesome.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt.
No worries. Yeah, so as I was saying, so I've been more or less on the social side of risk management. I'm really happy here, but I've heard more from Martti here saying the importance of detecting different types of risks and working with identifying vulnerabilities and threats that we have in our organization, but also what we just heard from Laura here, that it's not an isolated thing. It's not a one-person job, but we need the perspectives of different employers, for example, in a company that has different perspective of the organization to understand different types of risk. So today, what I was going to talk a little bit about are some of the challenges and observations that I have made in my studies or when I've been working with risk management in other capacities throughout the years, some of the things that people actually struggle with that can help us understand at least a little bit why it's so tricky for us to identify risks. So for today then, I have identified 3 areas that we will go through. The first thing is language when we talk about risk, because we often use risk as if there were one distinct, well-established definition of what a risk is, and that we know exactly what it means when we say risk. We're also going to talk a little bit about the assessment of a risk, because I've seen a lot of examples where people have this idea that the severity of a risk can always be accurately and justly determined. It's something that we can measure and mark to predict what's going to happen and what's going to go wrong in the future. And a lot of people struggle with this because of this mindset. And in the end, we will round up this with the actual execution of trying to perform risk management. That there is this idea in many cases that risk management is a task, first and foremost, for the experts and not something for layman or any random employee in a company to undertake. So let's start off here from the beginning here, language, that there exists one distinct and well-established definition of what risk is. And this is not very surprising, actually. I mean, we use risks in any day situation. We use it in our daily vocabulary. Crossing the street could be a risk, for example. As soon as we go into information security or cybersecurity, we often find definitions like this one, that risk management, for example, is about protecting an organization's valuable information. And already here we are starting to drift into kind of a vague definition, because valuable information, what is valuable for me in an organization might not be as valuable to you and so forth. But we're supposed to protect that from unwanted exposure, tampering, or destruction. So in this capacity, we are talking about pretty firmly like risk is something unwanted. Okay, sure, what could that be? Well, we have viruses, spyware, and other types of malware. Well, they're a major cyber risk for computer users. So we can speak about the risk as something unwanted. We don't want viruses or spyware, and we know that that is a major risk. The problem now is that this definition doesn't necessarily have to agree with other people's definition. A risk can also be a cause, for example. I mean, we can talk about risk as spam and phishing email increase the risk of being the victim of getting viruses and spyware onto our computers. A third definition could be of talking about the risk as a probability, that the risk of being the victim then of a cyber attack during the last year is roughly 32% if you look into the statistics. Whereas a fourth definition could be an expectation, like if you look at the total risk of both spam and phishing attacks, they're well higher than any other type of cyber security related risk. So already here we have 4 different definitions of risk that we can use interchangeably. So it's really important when we start to sit down, when we're doing risk assessments, that we come to an agreement of when we're talking about risk, what do we actually mean? So we're not talking about different things using the same words. And this can very well cause some confusion and changes the expectations that we have when we try to control the risks around us, because we're simply talking about different areas. The other challenge and observation that I have observed is the assessment in itself, that the severity of a risk, that it can always more or less be accurately and justly determined. I think this is one of the first uphill challenges that many people have when they start to working about with risk assessment and risk analysis and similarly. Because most often in various contexts, different standards and processes that we have when we try to follow and assess risks is that we usually find neat formulas like these to help us better understand and work with risks. Often we can find like the risk, for example, could be the product of the impact. For example, if we want to determine what could happen if our main server goes down, well, how much would that cost us? What would the impact be of something bad happening to it? Or our contract burning up, or what have you. We can estimate that somehow, even in monetary value, reputational value, or any other type of value that we may perceive, times the probability, how likely is it that it happens? And this would somehow then give us one way of defining the risk. And so an example of this also in Martti's slide here in the beginning, but I think he had a slightly different formulation, but these are very, very common. And it also gives you the idea that risk is something simple, functional, and something that we can calculate. Now, the problem, of course, is that these are very subjective many times when we do this qualitative risk assessment, as it's called. Determining the impact can lead to extremely long discussions because values differs from opinions to opinions. What I perceive to be valuable might not be as valuable in your eyes and vice versa. Probability, likewise, is also very tricky to figure out. And this I've seen lead to a lot of very long discussions where we try to pinpoint an accurate prediction of the future, more or less, how probable something is to happen. How probable is it that there will be a power failure, for example. And many times we don't simply have the statistics for it. We don't know, we don't have enough data to simply be able to do this from an historical point of view. So we have to make an educated guess, if you want, or suggestion. So we do it subjectively, basically. So let's take an example of what that could lead to. So here we have two different types of risk. They are completely unrelated to cyber, but nevertheless risks. So on the left side here, we have one risk, the risk of private car theft. I took the statistics yesterday from one website that was showing in Finland the percentage of having your car stolen. Or on the right side, we have another type of risk, the risk of somebody forgetting their remote control to their TV, either in the fridge or in the freezer. Okay, so we take a few seconds here now. If you guys either ponder upon it in your heads, or if you want to type in the chat, which one of these two do you think is the highest risk of getting your car stolen or forgetting your remote control in the fridge or freezer? See if I can get up the chat here. See what people are writing. Left, left, right, right. Okay, we have two people here voting on the left, some on the right, a lot of the left. Also, basically, we don't know. We have some saying the left and some saying the right. Now, looking purely again here on the statistics, you would be surprised. According to the numbers that I found, one unlucky fellow in 1,000 people will have their car stolen, whereas apparently out of 100 people, 4 of us will forget the remote control in the fridge or in the freezer. Now, a lot of people would say, yeah, hold on, but there's a difference here. Stealing my car is a little bit worse than, you know, forgetting the remote in the fridge. And you're absolutely correct. Because this is what it comes down to, that risk management was never about trying to predict the future, but we need to use it as a tool to help us more or less determine where to start with, where does it hurt the most, and how much would it hurt, so we know in what order where to start to protect our business, because we can't start with everything. So even though the remote control is more likely to happen, if it happens, I mean, the impact wouldn't be so bad. We have to run around and look for it for a while, whereas the car might have a completely different impact. So maybe it is more relevant than to start with looking into the protecting the car. So there are a lot of different social aspects here that actually determines how we look at risk. And I think it's really important that we are aware of these biases, if you want to call them that we have. Because the way we're looking at risk, and there are numerous studies on this, is that for one thing, the attitude towards the risk will affect a lot on how we perceive it. If taking the risk is for a good cause, then maybe we are willing to do it. Or if it's something that we completely disagree with, then absolutely we stay away from it. Similarly, the consequence, I mean, if it's a risk that will affect me personally, or my job title personally, or my family and friends, then the risk would probably be increased in my head at least. Whereas if it's something completely foreign or distant, or somebody who I never met, if the risk to him or her, I mean, it doesn't matter as much perhaps. And we tend to lower that risk and the expectation of that risk in our head. So people who owns a car, for example, will probably increase that risk a little bit versus those people who do not own a car. Or we can have specific fears. I mean, a lot of people are very scared of going on airplanes, for example, but we are perfectly fine taking a stroll in the car, whereas the statistics shows that it's safer to be in a plane. So these are all elements that play in when we try to assess risk, and it's very important that we are aware of these. So we know that this is not just me speaking, we can look at different angles, but we should also take this into account, because in the end, we're trying to prioritize where to start looking, where to start protecting things based on where it hurts the most, so we can make educated decisions for where to start and how much to spend on trying to protect us. Right, moving on here to the last observation or challenge when it comes to risk management is the actual execution of the risk assessment work, or doing risk management in general. I think this is one of the most odd observations that I have made throughout the years, and it is that a lot of people seem to think that risk management is something for the experts alone to take care of. We would like to see ourselves hiring a consultant, for example, an expert to come in and do it for us. And that might be all good and well, but the problem is that these experts most probably don't know the context. They don't have the insights of your organization. They don't really know the valuable information. Who does? Well, the people who work with it. And that is also why it's important to not do risk management, not try to assess the risks in isolation, but try to involve as many people from as many different areas in the organization as possible, so we get different types of perspectives. And this is also shown from also numerous types of studies that can help in many different ways. It can increase security awareness and engagement. People are more prone to act in a secure manner if they feel like they are a part of having worked towards what types of security controls we are supposed to implement in the company, that they're part owner of that decision. Also bring light to relevant aspects, for example, how people use a particular system or legal aspects that the lawyers know about that we don't know about, but might be a very good thing to know about. So it's good to involve them. And in the end, help security then fit the organization's daily operation better. So we, in the end, don't have security as an obstacle, but something that can aid us in the way that we are working, in the way that we are comfortable, yet still protecting the information that we are trying to use in our organization. So I think that is more or less exactly 15 minutes with some challenges and observations that I have been seen or take part of over the years when it comes to risk management, and why some people struggle with trying to assess them. So if you have any questions, be happy to give it a try to answer them.
Thank you. There is no comments or no questions from the chat, but I do have one, because I know there are some of my students from software development course here as well. So considering this so-called average software developer, how could risk assessment be integrated into their daily work as such?
Yeah, I mean, this is really good when it comes to threat analysis and threat modeling. We have, for example, really good frameworks. The top of my head is Stride, with I think it comes from Microsoft, where we can look at different aspects that could happen to technical risks, such as spoofing, for example, which is the first, because Stride is an acronym. Is there any way that we can trick this system that we are building to become another person, for example? So I would say, if you look at security by design, we talked a little bit about before that the humans are the weakest link. That may be, but there's also the first line of defense. So by being more aware about security as a developer, as help desk personnel, that does a great lot for securing the entire organization. So just being as you said, general software developer, there are security aspects and things that we should be aware of as well, I think.
Thank you. And that also presentation triggered one question now in the chat. Is there any research that would find a wide range of different security risk percentages for different items like cars, cell phones, or computers, like you had the risks for a car being stolen and so forth?
There are a lot of reports on different types of risks and statistics and numbers on that. Nothing that I know on the top of my head that I could recommend you to read, but every country, for example, has, I know Finland does, I know Sweden does, and the States and similar, have an enormous lot of different types of statistics when it comes to day-to-day risks, everything from car accidents to burglary to theft to all kinds of different types of risks. So that's one way to start. And when it comes to computer-related risks, security corporation organizations and antivirus firms are really good also releasing annual reports of percentages and risks and similar. So that's also one way to start looking at it.
I can say that in website, Cynic website, you can find the game named Riskify if you want to try this kind of fridge in the remote in the freeze if you want to try this game. So you can find it from the website.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. We actually took this one step further with a lot of different types of risks, and we made a game out of it that we called Riskify, as Lara was saying. So you're taking numerous different types of risks and you're trying to put them in order from highest risk to lowest risk, and then you can flip the cards around, and on the back side, the percentage you can see the actual percentage of it, so you can see how you reason and how it fits reality, so to say.
So if you take a break now for 8 minutes, so everybody can take a cup of tea. See you soon.
See you.
See you soon.
Yes, I got my tea. Helinä, you want to start?
Absolutely. I hope you can all see my screen. If not, just give me a shout. So thank you for joining me for the last presentation before the panel discussion, and thank you to all the previous presenters. Even if it's just 15 minutes, there's been so much good stuff going on tonight that I'm really grateful to be here and listen to them. My name's Helinä. I'm working as an information security specialist at the Finnish Transport and Communications Agency National Cybersecurity Center. And tonight I'll be talking to you about reporting cybersecurity issues to us. Now, in this presentation, I'll give you a quick overview of what the National Cybersecurity Center is, how do you report cybersecurity issues to us, and tips for reporting findings if you happen to cross against any. Now, let's get started. And who we are, some of you might know us by name, some of you might not, but we are the people behind the screen. And there are a lot of publications that come out of us. We have monthly publications, we have guides, we have tools, we have questions and answers, we have warnings, we have alerts, we have social media, we have YouTube videos and whatnot. And it might be all a bit confusing if you're only becoming to know about us now, but don't worry, I'll clarify that just a little bit. Now, some of you might not know the full extent of what the National Cybersecurity Center of Finland does, or Kyberturvallisuuskeskus, or Cybersäkerhetscentret. And we have a lot of responsibility, and a lot of that is revolving around situational awareness, knowing what is happening in the cybersecurity space in Finland, collaborative knowledge sharing, so sharing with other organizations, sharing with other groups of knowledge, monitoring and incident response, which is something that I am working with in my day work here at the Cybersecurity Center, assessment and accreditation. So, for example, assessing the cybersecurity of the Koronavilkku application that is used for tracking and tracing COVID-19 in Finland, and cybersecurity exercises. And maybe some of this is new to you because a lot of our visible work is around situational awareness and monitoring and incident response. And for that incident response, it's really important for us to know what is happening, and we are not omnipresent and rely on a lot of reports that we receive from outside of our monitoring that we also do. And this is why I wanted to talk a little bit about how to report cybersecurity issues to us. But in our day-to-day work, we are usually the people who are called in for help, and we never refuse. Because in order to keep people and the Finnish cybersecurity landscape secure, we need organizations like the Cybersecurity Center to ensure that people get the help they need and the guidance when there is a cybersecurity issue. And that's why we're here. Now, how to report cybersecurity issues. I will give you a step-by-step guide to this. Now listen carefully. We have a website, it's ncsc.fi for the English, and there is a place to report incidents. On the website, on the top right, there's a megaphone that says report incidents. And when you click that, a web page opens that says notification of information security breach. Now, this phrasing can be slightly distracting, but all sorts of cybersecurity issues can be reported to us from this little button. And it seems pretty simple, and it is, I assure you. But I can also help you understand what kind of cybersecurity issues you can report to us. And there's been a little bit of discussion from our previous speakers about phishing. And I want to give you an example of a case where phishing was reported to us. And by that report, how we were able to help secure other people from having their systems breached as a result of that phishing. So Laura earlier discussed about data and how some data is imported to criminals in some forms and some for others. And in the case of phishing, usually people want to get your credentials in email. And there was a case where a phishing email was reported to us by an individual. And our incident response people were able to look into that email, find out the structure of the website that was gathering the phishing credentials, and actually find out password and username combinations that had already been typed in on that phishing website. Now, because we have wonderful people, we were able to rally and find all these credentials, call up all the companies and the affected people and say, hey, your passwords and usernames are on this website. Have you taken action? And this way we were able to very quickly secure a whole list of companies and people, private individuals included in this country, because we got a report of phishing. And this is why reporting things to us is important. So we know what's happening, and we know how we can guide either people to make sure that they can take care of the situation, or do that ourselves by giving guidance and other helpful information. Now, other things you can report to us are system intrusions. For example, if there's an email break-in, someone's gotten into your email and is spreading something further out. If you see malicious software going around, ransomware, malware, malspam. We recently removed an alert regarding Emotet malspam, and it was a big cause for trouble for a long time, but happy to see that it's calmed down. But even that, for us to remove an alert on something relies on reports given to us. And when we started to see decreased amount of reports around Emotet malspam, we made the assessment that, hey, we can take the alert off now. We are not on the top of the wave anymore and have received a different kind of state. DDoS, distributed denial of service attacks. People often think that it's only large operators and organizations who see this, but we also receive reports from smaller organizations and even individual website hosters who say, hey, we saw this, and this is important to us. We need to know if that's happening. And also scams that try to gain access to systems, spread malware, personal information gathering, voice phishing, SMS phishing, and so forth. And I know it's a lot of stuff to take in, but basically, if there's a cybersecurity related issue, you should report it to us. And who can report? And I've seen some discussions around, hey, is it okay if I report this? Like, I'm not an expert. Like, is that fine? It's fine. Everyone can report issues to us. You don't have to be an expert. And all reports are handled as confidential, because confidentiality is important in the cybersecurity space in general. And for us to work with you confidentially, give you guidance, help you forward, we have to have mutual trust. And that is vital to us, and we will never veer away from that. So even if you would like to report confidentially, that is perfectly fine. So private individuals, organizations, companies, public entities, security researchers, etc., etc. everyone can report to us, and everyone's voice matters. Because when more people report to us, the better our idea of the whole situational awareness in this country will be. And the more reports we get, the better we understand current trends, if some phishing campaigns are topical at the moment, if scams are topical at the moment, and where are those trends moving. So everyone's voice matters in the reports to us. Now, some tips for reporting findings. So you might think, well, maybe you got a phishing SMS and it was like a postie related thing. Now, recently we've seen a campaign in these SMS based scam things that there might be a link that comes to you that says, hey, go check this postie thing from this website. And it might actually want to get your user credentials for something, or ask for your banking details, or maybe even get you to download a weird looking software on your phone. And in this situation, we want to get as much information as possible that you can provide. So what were you doing? What was the thing that you received? Where did it happen? Is there an example of it? Can you provide attachments? And in case of phishing, it's usually best if you can provide the whole message itself or the email itself. But if you don't know how to do it, don't worry. We will also help you get us the information that we need. And I did mention confidentiality. And even then, it is important to leave contact details for additional questions. Now, of course, if you want to just drop information and never talk to us again, that's fine. But sometimes we might want to have a contact address for further questions. And it's especially when we talk about vulnerabilities, for example, and finding critical vulnerabilities in other company systems that we want to ask more if you want to discuss. If not, that's fine. But having an open line for getting additional details is also important for us. But again, everything is confidential. You can also leave anonymous reports, but please provide as much as possible for us to work on, because that will help us get further, create better situational awareness of what's happening, and also move forward in possibly warning others if this is a cybersecurity trend that needs to be paid attention to. So help me to help you, to be honest. Like, when you give us more information, we can help you further in either solving the issue or moving forward with other means. And another thing that I want to spend a tiny bit of amount on is being aware of the legal and ethical boundaries for finding and reporting cybersecurity issues, right? There have been cases where people have been prodding around systems on their own and then making these findings public without being aware that there may be legal consequences. So just be aware that if you investigate and test security measures on a system without permission, you may face legal action. And I don't want to scare you, but it's important to understand the term responsible disclosure, or ethical disclosure, as it may sometimes be called, and be aware that if you go looking for security issues, if you go testing for cybersecurity vulnerabilities, you have to be aware of local legislation. Preferably, you should have the organization's approval for testing in writing, and report the findings to the organization directly in a responsible manner. But for all other general reporting and cybersecurity issues, we're very happy to receive them, very happy to help you with them, very happy to move forward with guiding and helping where necessary. But in these kind of cases, please be aware that there are legal and ethical boundaries if you go prodding around yourself. I know it's a bit of a bummer for me to say this, but we've seen cases where people are not aware that they are not actually allowed to go test if a public service admin panel has the default password and username combination or not. And just be careful, because you don't want to be invited to a police interview. That's all in all from me in short. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to me on Twitter. My handle is here. And our cybersecurity center email addresses are there if you have any general questions. But I'm happy to take any questions if there are some in the chat.
No questions in chat at the moment. Hopefully there will be, but I have a question. Since there has been this recent incident of the Vastaamo case, and
Yes.
I'm quite sure that made quite a spike in your amount of reports. Have there been similar spikes in your reportings in the recent years, or for example, the couple of years back when we got the GDPR in force? How did that affect your job anyway?
So in the recent years, I have to say that the tech support scam calls have been causing a huge spike in the reports. And it is a new phenomenon in the country. And of course, people will be reporting those. So there was definitely a big spike with reporting those.
All right, now we have a couple of questions here in the chat.
Lovely.
First, many employers conduct background checks on job candidates. What about NSCS?
The National Cybersecurity Center of Finland may conduct a background check for from suojelupoliisi perspective. So I can't remember what they are called in English, but some of the jobs require you to handle classified information, and for that, a certain level of background checks will be conducted. Yes.
Thank you. And another question: what licenses are required to become a cybersecurity professional if one wants to start a business or a career in the business?
Having a general interest in cybersecurity is a definite starting point, right? And what kind of education you're interested in will be the driving force in the career that you will create for yourself. I have an information systems degree. I don't have a cybersecurity degree. I don't have any cybersecurity licenses, but I have background that has been driven from my personal interests that have driven me to the point of being an information security specialist at the National Cybersecurity Center. And everyone's path is different. So I really strongly encourage you to follow your interests, talk to other cybersecurity professionals who do something that you find interesting, and take the suggestions from them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I assume Laura Palovuori will be taking it from here.
I know I feel that we are in safe when we have Helinä, Turunen and Cybersecurity Centria here with us. So I have planned some questions for the panel discussion. So we have Tom here now, and I want to ask Tom, so who has done a lot of testing on corporate networks. So tell me, what are the typical vulnerabilities or problems you have found?
Well, you could say that all corporate entities or companies are slightly different. So they are all of different sizes and have different business strategies and have different equipment and personnel. So actually one cannot compare them with each other. So therefore I can't tell you about typical vulnerabilities, but I can tell you about some things that we have found in companies that we have worked with. For the first, many companies had equipment that they had forgotten. And this naturally makes a severe security risk, because if equipment is forgotten, then the equipment is not in the scope of update procedures, and therefore this equipment can then have severe vulnerabilities. And this also brings up another thing that we have found in companies that we have worked with. We found also a lot of equipment that hadn't been updated. So this then is also a risk, but fortunately this equipment is then known to the companies. So the equipment is on the update lists, even though they have not necessarily been updated to the point that they should. But they are still in the scope of the update lists. And if the companies then need to be more secure, then they need to update this kind of equipment. I can't now hear Laura.
Okay, I have a question to Heikki, who wake up. Yes. So your thesis are ready, so we could talk for a comment about the data privacy.
Well, yeah, to extend my previous introduction, I have been studying the GDPR since I think 2016. When it was first published, and I did my bachelor's thesis around it, and also my master's thesis around the GDPR, and that's why also the case of Vastaamo has been quite topical for me as well. But for others, we were talking about security, and of course security and privacy go hand in hand. How do you feel about the recent cases, for example, the Vastaamo case, and especially the GDPR coming in force a couple of years ago? How has that affected your work?
Who wants to start?
Anyone willing, please do answer.
Okay, I can start. So I think, well, there was basically two questions. So the Vastaamo case and the GDPR case. So again, I want to emphasize that I have worked mostly as a pen tester and doing the security from the offensive side. So for me, GDPR became more, I think, relevant when I worked as a security lead for a startup for a moment. And as a startup, as you do, you are not only working with one thing, but you're working with multiple things. So I think GDPR in practice, it's a good legislation, but especially working with environments that have parts in multiple places. So it's, for example, using just AWS is a one thing, so in cloud service, but then you have multiple different sources for like vendors for delivering data or delivering services to you. So it's a really difficult situation. But when it comes to GDPR in terms of Vastaamo, then I think it's like the issue with Vastaamo necessarily is not the how should I put it? It's not GDPR, but it's more about how this data was protected by technical means, because it's in GDPR, there is the differentiation with data that needs to be collected, and then the data that is not needed, but then there's legitimate interest to collect that. So for example, analytics and things like this. So for me personally, I think it's a good initiative, GDPR, and we need something like that more globally to control what companies are collecting on users, because that data can then be either stolen and then lost, or well, stolen and then sold forward if that is any value to anyone. But also it's just to protect us and our freedom of speech and our freedom of thought, so that, for example, this data cannot be analyzed in ways that then it could be used against us. For example, going back to what I mentioned about the surveillance and propaganda and so on. But these are quite heavy topics, and it's something that needs to be tackled with, I think, not only GDPR, but something that would affect us all globally.
Laura, can I ask you, because we talk about Vastaamo now many times, so what we actually know about it by now?
Sorry, I was muted. So yeah, so the situation as far as I know right now in public is that the well, one turning point that happened was that the attacker leaked basically a lot of his data online, and now there are criminal investigation is still ongoing. So we have to basically wait and see for the official statement on that, what is like what has happened and what has taken place, and so we can all learn from that. But just to recap shortly is that Vastaamo, the psychotherapy center, was breached, and their database holding their client records was breached, and then this attacker first ransomed with the data the Vastaamo company, the company, and then started to ransom individual people that were part of the leaked and the breached data. So yeah, that's basically the situation as it is, and there's like individual investigations going on, apparently as can be deduced also from public. And for example, Mikko Hyppönen has been very active in asking for more details in from external sources, for example, through Ylilauta and so on.
Martin, I guess there have been some kind of data scandal in Sweden also, if you want to tell about this, so we don't just all talk, just speak what's happening in Finland. So.
Yes, of course, there have been quite a few. First one that comes to mind now would be a few years ago we had the Swedish transportation agency, for example, that had a scandal of potentially leaking very sensitive information to foreign countries. And what is interesting with that case is that it's not a technical risk per se, and it's not an outsider trying to break in and steal data. This was more or less a miss in the procurement process, because this agency that we're talking about was in the process of outsourcing their infrastructure with held and stored a lot of very sensitive information, everything from money, route transportations, for example, addresses to fighter pilots and similar types of information. Now, in the procurement, they missed to inform that this must be hosted in Sweden, because otherwise that would be you would be breaking the law. And they did not include that the personnel handling this information needed to have the required background checks that we were talking about and the right security clearances. So as it happened, this outsourcing landed in some Eastern European countries and with personnel that had not undergone this background checks and security clearances. So potentially there is a risk of unknown employees then having access to extremely sensitive information that is of national security concerns for Sweden, and could, I guess, just as easily also clean up the evidence of them copying and looking at these types of information. So that is also, I think, highlights that security risks don't necessarily have to be technical, and they don't necessarily have to be outsiders trying to break in, or even some disgruntled employees, but could also be mistakes basically happening. So awareness when it comes to security is everywhere and can take many shapes. So as we were saying before, this is not a one-person job. This is why we need to have more people involved, more eyes on it, and more awareness of potentially what could happen, what are the risks, and who owns the risk, who is responsible for making the decisions in the end.
Heikki, do you want to read some questions on the chat?
Yeah, but I think Helinä looks like she's about to answer both Laura and Martin, so I'll give her a turn first.
How did you know? Lauri asked here about the legal system evolving to make cybercrime related convictions. And actually, if you look at the rikoslaki, the criminal law in Finland, we already have a lot of cybersecurity related crimes in there. And I'm just posting a link to that so you can have a closer look. But there have been convictions of intrusions. There have been convictions of attacks in Finland. Maybe they're not all under the public eye. There are also investigations other people will never see, but there are ongoing investigations. Of course, because it is the internet, it is sometimes very easy to make yourself untraceable when you make these crimes. So that is also one part in why we don't always see that many convictions locally. But there are also international legal investigations that might say that the criminals will not be convicted locally in Finland, but might be in France or Germany or in the States. So it's a global conversation that is ongoing on the criminal activities side. Now then, Valtteri had an excellent point here, asking about breaches that seem to be happening constantly and looking at password breach numbers. There's a lot of passwords going around, and at the same time, news seem to report of actual harmful consequences relatively rarely. So that apart from Vastaamo, are the threats often overestimated, or is it only that information rarely reaches regular people? And sometimes information security professionals just smile and say that it's better that you don't know. But the reality is that vulnerability scanning is happening constantly. Systems are trying to be intruded constantly. Passwords are trying to be cracked constantly. People are trying to reuse breached passwords credentials constantly to gain access to systems. But that is seen as normal behavior in the cybersecurity world. And then this is why we have entities like the National Cybersecurity Center, information security officers, experts, other individuals and organizations keeping the landscape safe so that you might not ever even have to think about it. But yes, this activity happens all the time.
I have a question also. Maybe Martti can answer. The responsibility of the company's management and director in the implementation of data security, and how to keep security issues in the minds of staff.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I have always said that the company leadership or management are responsible of the cybersecurity culture in the company. This is the starting point, how they create. And of course, there are different types. For example, 2 weeks ago, here in University of Jyväskylä, our IT team sent to everybody an email. And the content was, okay, your email is compromised. We need your credentials, username and password to recreate or recover your email. And unfortunately, some of our employees give those. And then, of course, they inform us, okay, this was a test, so please be aware about those emails. One foreign company, they have a system, it is IT company. Every morning you open your computer in your office. There's question about cybersecurity. And if you don't answer right, the system not open. They asking another question. And then when you know the right answer, okay, now you can go on more. So there is different type of like training the people, get the information and create like the positive cybersecurity culture in the company. So even I am like more paranoid and speaking so much about the threats and vulnerabilities, but the best way is create like the positive attitude, positive culture in the company and saying that this is business for everybody. Everybody are responsible of the cybersecurity in our company or whatever you are working. Thank you.
Martin from Luleå, do you want to say something about company risk management?
Yeah, I mean, like I was saying before in the presentation, it is, I would say, the foundation of security to know about your risks and have a systematic approach to identify them. But also, as we were in here talking about the responsibility of it, who owns the risks in the end, for example, and that is typically the board. You can have a chief security employee who is in charge of keeping the risk registry and similarly similar stuff updated and finding vulnerabilities and making sure that we prioritize everything to the best of our abilities and coming up with suggestions for how to tackle various threats and vulnerabilities. But in the end, this is basically background materials for the board to make an educated decision, because I think, at least in the end, it's they who need to be responsible to having said yes or no. Should we go forth to this? Can we spend this amount of money and time on doing it and so forth, so that we're not in the end blaming it on the employees whose role it never was to make that type of decision. So I think responsibility comes from the board, and that is why it's also so important to anchor the whole security program from the board to the bottom and, well, get everyone on board, basically.
So I have one question to Helinä also, because I know that you know something about security of games and gaming. So what about the security, cybersecurity of home, children, teenage?
Thank you. It's an excellent question, and I'm gonna go back to what Martti said in the beginning, and when I commented about humans being the weakest link. Often the games we play and the software we download is not designed to be secure. And that's why learning secure behaviors starts at home, starts with working together with parents, working with the schools, understanding what are the similar information security behaviors we have to adapt, like we have physical security. So do you lock your door every day when you go out? Do you have the same key for every possible access that you have? Do you have the same password for every account you have? Do you have the same password for every game that you have? Do you have the additional security measures like multi-factor authentication or something else to make sure that no one else can get access to the things that you want to use? So it's, again, building this kind of awareness, knowing that not every game, not every software is secure, and knowing that these are skills that you can practice at home, together with your family and in school, to make everyone more aware and more comfortable with understanding what kind of measures we have to take to keep us secure.
There are a few questions in the chat at the moment. First, let's have a quick talk to whoever wishes to answer. That people often have several websites, social media places, and other systems that require a username and a password. What is your opinion? How to create, manage, and remember passwords?
Password manager. No, but seriously, I think password manager is the best way to go. So you have a separate, basically, tool for managing all your passwords, where you only have one password that should be strong and that you remember. And then that password unlocks the other password. So at rest, they are always encrypted basically with that one singular password. And personally, for example, I use a tool called 1Password, and I have used it for a very long time.
Another good trick, a friend of mine, Marcus Nolberg, he is from the university in Skövde here in Sweden, is doing a lot of studies and research on password and the way we try to remember them. And typically we have been fostering, you should have like 8 to 12 characters, you should be complex, it's impossible to remember. So his advice instead, and it has shown to work pretty well, is to focus on length instead. Of course, try to have a sentence and try to make that sentence as embarrassing as possible so you wouldn't share it with a colleague, for example, or put it on a post-it note. So that could be another trick as well.
I want to add to Laura's answer that, for example, I know one of my passwords that is for my password manager. I have hundreds of passwords and accounts around the web, but I don't know any of them. So even if someone would torture me or give me 1,000 euros, like Martti said, I couldn't even give my passwords away because I don't know them. So, and also just having another layer of security like multi-factor authentication, even to add to your password managers, then you are always like 2 steps ahead.
Yeah, and sorry, just to add on Martin's comment, because I found this quite funny, that one of my a colleague of mine, but they did a research on passwords and what kind of passwords people are using, and they were based on breached passwords and cracked passwords, basically, and a lot of them were actually profanities. So a lot of curse words, at least in Finland. So people in Finland apparently like to curse. But with that being said, with like, if you remember your passwords, there's always the threat that you are using the same subsets of things. So for example, that I would be using Laura's Instagram 2018 exclamation mark, and then like that. So if one of those is cracked, then if someone is determined enough, they could figure out the pattern, for example.
Yeah, definitely, I agree. And I also agree here with Heikki that, I mean, I'm similar. I use Password Manager. I think I have half a dozen passwords that I remember in my head that are unique. Everything else in the Password Manager is automatically generated. I have no idea what they are. And but then again, I mean, then it comes to another security perspective that you need to have that database backed up. So, because if that disappears, then it's game over basically, unless you can reset it through an email or similar.
Can we talk about COVID-19 and home offices and these viruses and what's spread with email related to COVID-19? Martti, for example.
So what we know today is that during the COVID time, they are more like aggressive phishing emails. And those put something about the COVID that, okay, using the COVID case as like possibility to access your credential or create some such stories that my wife is almost dead in COVID and now I have the money to send you or whatever. But different type of phishing emails with this COVID and Corona themes are more increasing. And other I heard is that because now we are working at home or online using the Zoom or Teams or whatever, there is also some examples sending you like request to participate some Zoom meeting, which is like scam. And because and other thing is that maybe in your company or university or whatever, all these security level are higher than at your home. And now some companies are necessary that the employee have access to company database. How is that secure enough? Normally you use your company database in your office computer and somebody is checking what happens inside the company information system. And now there is more access outside the office from your home office to company databases. So they are more vulnerabilities, and the bad guys knows those, and they have more this kind of, as I said, phishings, ransomwares, even DDoS during this COVID time.
And I can also add to that during this COVID remote working time, we use a lot more remote access to gain access to work company stuff, and we use a VPN. And a lot of companies use various VPN software that are actually very vulnerable if they have not been updated. And automated vulnerability scanning is happening all the time, and automated exploitation is happening if you don't update your VPN services. So this is a very relevant thing, that these attacks are happening underneath all the times, and the baddies are trying to get into these systems if they're not updated. And because there are more of them now because of COVID and remote working, it is really a relevant threat.
We still have time. I would like to talk about Internet of Things, IoT, the problems there.
Of course, if we have more and more IoT connected in the internet, and problem I have seen is that those are not always very good protected. They use the default passwords and so on. And we have this Mirai botnet, one example, what the bad guys are doing when they collect the IoTs and create the botnets. So, and even in the future, when we have these 5G and more like in manufacturing level and industry using IoTs, edge computing, 5G, and the question is, how secure are those systems? We have one Business Finland funded research with many companies and universities focusing about the data and information flow in the manufacturing level and the IoTs and 5G and new systems. But we are, I don't say that we are behind the bad guys, but we are, if we don't look enough about the security issues, we have a problem in the future, because this IoT is very rapidly increasing element or environment.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Martti. And I think one major factor that contributes to this is that we have a lot of devices, either you call them IoT or smart devices, that are online, and they have been put online, but then they receive no updates. And for example, there are, for example, a startup company that creates, let's say, a fridge camera that you can put in your fridge, but that company tanks and they no longer exist, but the system still works, or that people are still using it. So there's multiple ways how these kind of devices can be just left out there with very low security standards implemented. Either they are so old or they do not include any mechanism for updating. So I feel it's a field that we are getting better at, like for new companies and for companies that are actually like in the cycle of updating things. But there are so many players in this field. And for many of these players, it's just crucial to get these items out to the shelves and to the hands of the consumers. So security is sometimes perhaps overlooked, and then it can be hard to implement afterwards.
I absolutely agree with Laura, and the harsh reality is that these devices just keep on giving. And in the COVID time, the example we've seen now is that a hand sanitizer was plugged into the internet and used as a part of an attack. So we need to get better at this, like, to be honest. It just needs to get better.
I think that also puts an interesting aspect on awareness. I mean, consumer demands, for example. We really want to buy new cool stuff for a cheap price, and sadly, implementing security features and keeping it up to date and so forth costs money. So if you want to have as many customers as possible hitting the market before is more beneficial. So we need to make people, I think at least, we need to make people more aware and actually request and demand high security. Some examples of baby cameras being taken over and things might scare people in the right direction. And the more we talk about it, perhaps the more people will ask for it. And the more people ask for it, the more of a feature it becomes that people request.
Absolutely, and there are actually some national level information security standardizations that are being put into use. For example, in Finland, there's the information security stamp or tietoturvamerkki that is given to some IoT products as a show of this, as a sign of this, that, hey, this is actually secure by design and not just like for show. So, yeah.
So now what do you think if the human being is the strongest or the weakest link?
So, as I have said many times, I'm so paranoid. So my smartphone is nothing inside, no application. If I lose it, I don't care because they only some numbers. And I don't have any social media account, only LinkedIn. So somebody asking, is that possible to be outside of social media a day or a week? I can be outside rest of the year. So that's maybe it's not on very good advice to everybody. But I'm meaning that we can find a good way in our daily life to working more smart way in the internet. And if we know like the threats and those things, we can create our own way to own personal cybersecurity culture.
I just want to say that I think maybe the most of the participants here found this webinar through the social media, so I like to use it still. Are we fine? More comments? The last 2 minutes.
No, I can add to the cybersecurity culture of things that, you know, we need to start thinking about cybersecurity as important as physical security. You know, keep your doors locked. Don't give your keys to strangers. Don't hop into a stranger's van. Don't give someone your passport if they ask them. You know, we need to understand that the impact now for cybersecurity is the same as your physical security, and it needs to be addressed as heavily as that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with Helinä, and I agree also with Helina's point previously on people or humans not being the weakest link in security. And I think that people are actually the strongest link in security because good attacks, they always slip through the technical defenses. So all the code that we write, all the detections we write, they're just that they're code. They can be bypassed in some means. So we as humans, we can be the ones that actually detect that, okay, something is now awry. Like, okay, maybe I clicked on a link, but then I get this sudden feeling that maybe I did something that I shouldn't have. Then that's the way we can act and how we can secure things, because no amount of tools or code or firewalls or antivirus will ever be able to do that sense of suspicion.
Yeah, I think we really put the hammer on the nail here with the culture that fits everyone, so that security doesn't become an obstacle. I find sometimes the security professional use people as the weakest link as a very convenient excuse because they're irritated that the end user is not following their security measures. But in the end, many of these security measures doesn't fit the organization or the way that people work with information, which makes it bound to be circumvented. And that's not the fault of the employees. That, I would say, is the fault of the security person not understanding how the information must be used so people can do their work. So security culture that fits everyone, I think, is really, really important.
Okay, Martti, the last words.
You mean that me, the last verse?
Yeah.
So as I said that, okay, I try to be more positive about how in this case, but as I said many times that everybody must be aware, as every panelist have said many times, to be aware to be in the internet. But as Laura said, that we are like the strongest in the internet because we are doing there, we are create the culture, we are create the cybersecurity leadership, we are create all the technology there. And if everybody in the positions they have in this cyberspace try to doing the best, we can create like more trustful environment for everybody. And for me, thank you very much about this webinar and all the comments. There's more comments that we cannot answer, so it's good to see that the participants are interested in about these items. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I created some questions what will be sent to all the participants. If you wonder that you will get some extra email. So it was me.
Thank you everyone for attending, and especially the audience who has been very active in questions. Unfortunately, we couldn't take all the questions in our discussion this time, and the recording will be at Centria YouTube channel, so also remember to follow Centria in YouTube so you can get the notion when we have uploaded the video. And thank you, our panelists. Very awesome to hear from you. And unfortunately, I already have to be in another meeting after this, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Stay
Take
safe.
care.
Bye-bye.